Welcome back. Previously, my colony of misfits, rejects, and angry waterfowl were in the process of mining fancy space rock out of a larger, somewhat more fancy space rock in the hopes of upgrading my ship enough to let me do useful things, like exist in it, without playing a perpetual game of storage shelf twister. While I have, to a certain extent, been successful in this task, angry space primates have taken an exception to my rock hounding, and seeing as I have precisely one person who can exit the ship to fight them without suffocating, I opted to demonstrate the better part of valor and book it back to the planet's surface. Goose pitches us down in the middle of a desert, and other than everyone being violently motion sick thanks to some questionable piloting decisions, we land safely and conveniently positioned next to a bunch of steel that will soon become spaceship parts. In addition to installing some much-needed floor space, we can now upgrade our ship systems using a bunch of those vac-stone blocks we grabbed. These new engines give us a much larger effective range and a far shorter cooldown per hop, and you can have up to 6 on your ship in addition to the 4 small thrusters I already have. I didn't really need the longer travel distance, but the shorter engine cooldown is a massively important security upgrade. One of the downsides of jumping around everywhere is the lack of static fortifications, and with Randy allowing raids to in principle happen up to twice a day back to back, getting that cooldown as far as possible reduces the chance of being caught up in a raid with my metaphorical pants down. One of the other big things I wanted to do while I was here is try and offload some of my excess cargo, and to this end I chose a map tile directly next door to a still technically friendly settlement that I can race pawns in between pretty quickly. My ship's landing site still counts as a colony for game management purposes, and having a colony so close to another faction kinda ticks people off, so inserting myself in their personal bubble for too long will eventually result in homicidal tendencies, and I will need to either bail soon or bribe generously, but for now it's just a convenient way of dumping all the dead animal bits and recreational pharmaceuticals I have no use for in exchange for some cash. The Federation of Ateron might not like my proximity, but they certainly like my wares, and after a couple of very profitable business-making trips, I return home loaded down with the entire colony's supplies of plasteel gold components and skill trainers in my pockets, in addition to a few of a new item called a sentience catalyst, which supposedly makes animals easier to tame, train, and able to be trained at a higher level. Fun, but not likely to be useful in my colonies. Between all my ship upgrades and the pile of junk I just sold, we depart from the really obnoxiously named Mount Purple Tracro Yokako Flats and head northeast to a specific spot in the Aurora Forest. Odyssey introduces a huge amount of world map content with the express goal of making exploring more interesting, and as part of that, map tile modifiers have been majorly reworked to include a bunch of new properties. I haven't really been paying attention to any of them yet, but now it seems like a good time to start, and this one tile in particular advertises there being unusually abundant animal life. After landing, I can confirm that yes, the map was not kidding when it said that it had abundant animal life. It isn't like Disney princess levels of deer falling into your lap or anything, but there are definitely more animals here than in a usual forest. I can also confirm that we need to get Goose some piloting classes or something, because this is kind of ridiculous. My dude, use the autopilot button already, and maybe the landing gear. After a couple weeks of farming, fishing, hunting, and relaxing rustic crafting tasks, such as installing bionic limbs and cybernetically enhancing my pilot so that they will stop randomly crashing my starship into literally everything that is stationary within a 5-mile radius, a psychic ship chunk I'm too lazy to take care of chases me out of the forest. We have plenty of food, plenty of fuel, and my pods haven't been whining about the state of their bedrooms too much yet, so there really isn't anything I need to do urgently, and I opt to try and head back to a previous launch site just to see what the place looks like after I leave it. Turns out, the game just straight up won't let you return to a tile you've previously visited. Period. Lovely. I think this flies directly in the face of what the DLC is supposed to be about, and hate it with the fire of 1,000 suns, so while I lecture you about that, let's instead hit up a random stockpile of junk until I figure out what I'm doing with myself here. First off, the only reason I can think of to implement what is effectively tile destruction is as an anti-cheese tactic to prevent people from spam visiting high-value map tiles repeatedly. Which is lame. You would honestly be far better off just silently wiping the unique tile traits after you abandon a map on it and incrementing an integer counter or something so that the next time the map generates, you can add the integer counter to the seed and it'll look different. If you were feeling energetic, you could even lean into this changing tile trait mechanic more and have tile traits shift over time or in response to world events or something in a way that makes the world map feel dynamic. Or just put in a scanning mechanic, kind of like the long-range mineral scanner, to let you discover new map traits so people on small maps don't run out of the things. The solution is not to pollute the world map with dozens of these useless crater icons. The whole point of the DLC is to roleplay as a bunch of nomadic world hoppers. Nobody is going to care where they came from if there isn't anything special to go back to, but they absolutely will care if they can't take a vacation on the one tropical island chain on the entire world because their spaceship Goomba stomped it into the ocean the first time they visited and it never recovered. As it stands right now, your gameplay loop is to grid search the entire world map, one tile at a time to find interesting places to land, which is tedious and annoying, by the way, and for the love of everything good and holy, Ludion, please put in a search function, land there for a couple weeks, get chased off by raiders, and then be able to never return again. This is dumb. Conveniently, I'm also not alone in this assessment, and despite the DLC being live for 2-ish days at the time of writing this, there is already a mod to remove this mechanic that I immediately installed. Have I mentioned how unbelievably base the Rimworld modding scene is? Like, yeah, sure, a solid 90% of it is stuff that you can install to translate the flavor text on your omnicidal cybernetic magical psychic catgirl waifu morph into the objectively superior language of ancient Mesopotamian or something, but the other 10% of it is super useful for fixing really weird design decisions like this. So anyway, I put that mod in, I grabbed my goodies, and in that time decided I would give a new mission type where you protect a device a shot. TLDR, we have a fancy scanner here that some person/AI thing wants us to do something with and keep people from attacking, I think. I didn't really read it. I have no idea what sort of hostile resistance I can expect, but with only 6 vaguely decent pawns, I fully expect to have to withdraw and fail the mission. So my goal here is to explore the mechanic and figure out what sort of threats I'm going to be facing to counter them in the future. As an added bonus, the quest also happens to be taking place in one of the many new map types added by Odyssey, which is a ruined cityscape. The world map describes these as ruins and says that they may contain a wide variety of traps, so I'm going to be smart and fortify the sensor first before I start poking around, but once that's done, I expect to have some fun here. During the first day of fortifications, some friendlies also wandered in, and we heard word of some sort of new thing called a ruined garrison, which I will want to hit up after the fact, assuming people aren't too injured or dead to make that possible. With fortifications done, the next day I set out in search of something. I have no idea what I'm going to find in this city, if anything, but I want to find it now while my pawns are still fresh and less likely to engage in spontaneous self-immolation inspired by stubbed toes or something, so let's get it done quickly. Our first find is some random dude who is chilling out in a cryptosleep casket. He doesn't have any interesting stats or traits, and I can't really be bothered to capture him to steal his clothing, so he gets to leave. Another 5 minutes of wandering later turns up precisely one other thing of interest, which is a new sleeping mech type that's basically just a reskinned Lancer with the new laser gun, guarding a second cryptosleep pod. We beat the daylights out of it, open the pod, and then beat the daylights out of the hostile pawn that was occupying it, netting a small handful of plasteel and a couple of components as a reward. Woo, what incredible treasures we have obtained. The next building is a tad more interesting, as Brick lives up to her namesake and gets to clear out a hunter drone and wasp trap with her face. Drones are basically a heat-seeking Roomba with a grenade on top and are dangerous but not usually life-threatening, and the wasp trap spits a handful of what claim to be mostly non-lethal drones with paralytic syringes, but neither do much against marine armor. We also net ourselves, wait for it, 2 components and 50 steel from some random loot boxes. Yay! I definitely didn't get like 5 times as much steel from breaking apart some tables I found, but sure, we'll take it. We also found another pod with another pawn, who seems to be the exact clone of the first one we found, complete with the same traits, skills, and passions. Methinks some bugs, maybe need some patching. But in the meantime, I'm crossing my fingers for a map with an iron-willed sanguine body modder variant, because, you know, obviously. If you're willing to be really generous with the term, we continue looting for the next couple of days. In reality, 95% of the time is spent wandering around a bunch of empty buildings full of garbage, poking at things. 3% of it is killing random mechs and insects that have set up shop, and 2% of it is maybe finding something worth grabbing. I still think it was worth doing, at least initially, but it wasn't the massive pile of free goodies that I was expecting, and the biggest gains seem to come from pickpocketing all the people you find in the crypto sleep caskets. These folks spawn with the same gear and loot table as ancient danger pawns, so their stuff is usually worth stealing if you can get away with it, but other than them, the rest of the place was stripped clean, and there are easier ways of making money, and I could have just crafted better equipment myself if I'd wanted some, so not terribly fantastic. Either way, I did come out of it with a couple of suits of free, low-quality marine armor, some plasteel, some gold, and an excellent recruit named Rika, so regardless of whatever else happens, this mission did at least pay rent. 8 or so days in, and we finally get the raid that was supposed to happen with the scanner, and apparently, despite our species possessing the technology needed to colonize the galaxy, there are still a non-zero number of folks who think that 5G cell towers cause brain cancer, because their excuse is the scanner is a weapon designed to psychically disturb people. Now, mind you, I do agree that these folks definitely would benefit from being less psychically disturbed, but something tells me that there is only one treatment for their current condition, and as a responsible and enthusiastic supporter of free medical care and the Second Amendment, I set out to deliver it in the only way I know how. Needless to say, with all these ruins around to play with, they don't put up much of a fight. We complete the quest around the same time we finish cleaning out the ruins, netting me some sort of shield generator thing that I don't have the space or inclination to use, and other than the loot I already mentioned, we found a couple other interesting things. One is a map, which is a new item that can be read to reveal a quest on the world. Interestingly, you can also read it after the quest it triggers has already fired, and I'm not sure what, if any, benefit there is to doing this, since I thought they were supposed to be consumable, but I guess we will see. I also found an orbital uplink that can be hacked to generate another world quest. This time it's a quest to find an asteroid rich in uranium, which is a material that, as far as I know, is just as useless in this DLC as it is in the base game, and unless I suddenly need to field a bunch of uranium slug turrets, I think I'm gonna pass. Also, say hi to Rika, now known as Shy Grant. Shy is a 14-year-old psychopathic body-modding kid scientist with a great memory, a greater love and skill for shooting, and decent medical, intellectual, and crafting skill/passion combos. Yes, please. Sign me up. Because I can, I also hit up the ancient danger that spawned in on the map and clear it out as well. There's nothing much useful here other than a centipede, a single advanced component, and some steel from the cryptoslate caskets, which is probably those loot multipliers hitting different. But more stuff is more gooder, and I have the space, so why not? I'm eventually chased out of my freshly looted abandoned city by the average population of a Motel 6 and forced to select a new landing site, and since the first one went so well, I opt to take a second transmitter protection quest a few yonks out to the east. How far is a few yonks, you ask? Well, it's a very technical term that when translated into layman speak means whatever 750 chemfuel worth a lateral movement is. Conveniently, this is placed on the Gulf of Menorah, an interesting water formation that somehow manages to be classified as part of the ocean, despite bordering the edge of a landlocked freshwater lake, and I can refuel my reserves of food by depopulating the local water body rather than doing something boring like farming. The raid this scanner prompts, which is, again, some pirates, but this time instead of being cell phone haters, they're just internet weirdos who want to wage war in the name of revenge against an unspecified and ill-defined enemy, made the unfortunate tactical decision of equipping half of their units with frag grenades, which, for all of their many graces, do not count range amongst their number. This has some entirely predictable consequences, and they get mopped out without any issues, giving me an item called a grav core. This is an upgrade material for my ship, and can be either used to create a grav field extender, also known as make the ship bigger upgrade, or a grav core power cell, also known as free energy forever with no downsides, because that seems balanced. Though, in retrospect, geothermal is kind of the same thing, so maybe I will abstain from performative molding about this. Regardless, I go with the extender because more ship, more gooder, and also because I need some bedrooms. Of course, the grav field extension does precisely nothing to solve the actual problem I'm facing right now, which is a lack of materials with which to upgrade my ship. So after another quick pit stop at the local friendly outpost to offload the contents of your average warehouse sale, it's back to space for us. A full set of marine and recon armor has a 97% passive vacuum resistance stat, which in principle should allow pawns to navigate space mostly. And to be quite honest, I have no idea if that 3% difference even matters, because it never really seemed to when I was testing it. But I do have plenty of pawns in some combination of marine and recon armor now, so I guess we're gonna find out. Ironically, the uranium-rich meteor I scanned earlier ends up being my chosen destination, since I do need some uranium to finish out my marine armor sets, and I may as well double dip on the Vaxstone project. During this, I also recruit Cod, aka Onyx Composers, whose first action as my new pawn was to very nearly take a dip in the cold embrace of space, because when he joined up, he wasn't set to the ship-only exclusion zone. This would have been especially unfortunate, because Cod is an aesthetic body modder with skill and passions in shooting melee and plants, and will be an excellent addition once we get him some gear and body parts. And a closet. Space mining is largely uneventful. After an unexpectedly quick departure that I was forced to make during the first time I did this, I learned from my mistakes and set up some static fortifications to at least try and hold off raiders, along with a few of those hunter traps I was talking about earlier, entirely as a lark. As expected, the traps are not terribly great at doing anything other than incidental chip damage, but against a more concentrated humanoid deathball they'd probably be better, and there were so few mechs in the raid that I had to fight off that my pawns swept them without any issue. What eventually kicks me off of my rock isn't the raiders, it's running out of food. My pawns can really pack away the calories, and even though I started out with a couple hundred meals lying around, those reserves dried up remarkably quickly in the face of 8 colonists who do nothing but haul around rocks all day. While yes, this is minorly annoying, in the grand scheme of things it doesn't much matter, since I'm leaving space with 6,500 Vaxstone bricks, which is probably enough. I'll need to take longer stops to restock on plasteel and make ship upgrades out of all the Vaxstone, so everyone else might as well be resupplying while we do that, and I therefore set my sights on a grassland tile with coastal access and a high deer population as my next landing spot. Grasslands are a new biome added by the DLC. They are, as the name suggests, grassy. Wow. They feature very few trees and don't have geothermal vents, but beyond that they're functionally just giant flat slabs of dirt with a lot of room for agriculture. Neat looking, but otherwise nothing special, which is exactly what I need because I want to do lots of agriculture. That plan gets scuppered thanks, once again, to a pirate raid, which more than anything highlights my need for more storage space because in retreating from that raid I was forced to leave behind several thousand potatoes left in the fields to rot. This wasn't a pawn labor thing either. My non-cooked pawns were twiddling their thumbs waiting on the packaged survival meal crafting process to clean out space on my ship, so this was just straight up wasted pawn labor because I couldn't store the potatoes. At the very least, we now have 6 broom closets masquerading as private bedrooms on board now, though, so my pawns are no longer whining about terrible barracks and disturbed sleep and so-and-so's foot odor all the time. We'll take the small victories where we can. After a rather long layover in somewhere called Cape Cascu to finish crafting up my packaged survival meals, clean up the storage space a bit, and rest off an unfortunate bout of sudden malaria, I directed my colony towards a new survey quest to get myself a piloting sub-persona core. Between Goose and Lola's high intellectual stats and pilot implants, our risks of landing mishaps are pretty low already, but it would be nice to not have to worry about that sort of thing at all if I can, and supposedly this thing helps with that. Naturally, my departure has nothing at all to do with the insect infestation I discovered in the nearby Ancient Danger. No sir, nothing at all. Lacking anything more productive to do on a map that's 90% rock, I have my colonists start strip mining in hopes of replenishing my plasteel supplies a bit, but don't have any luck. Deposits of the stuff are rare in the first place, and with the non-starting map penalty in full swing, finding anything other than steel and components is quite uncommon. Either way, today's flavor of angsty flesh muffins is complaining about the scanner because it's too close to one of their hidden supply caches, which, like, my brother. If you have a hidden supply cache nearby, the first step to keeping it hidden is not telling people it exists in the first place. As a counter-argument, have you considered that maybe your hidden caches aren't being raided because we keep scanning them, but instead because of your terrible OPSEC? Anyway, like the first two groups, they are hilariously under-equipped to do anything, so they go down like a brick in an elevator shaft. The mech raid after is a little bit more annoying, but since they're composed entirely of squishy variants and got horribly spread out and distracted by the local insect colonies, mopping them up was pretty trivial as well. After installing the piloting sub-persona, which bears a remarkable resemblance to a sticky note with the words, "Did you remember to engage the landing gear?" written on it, I send my colony further west a bit and set down near an ancient stockpile site I caught wind of some time ago from a trade caravan. Welcome to the Glow Forests, yet another biome added by the Odyssey DLC. Its gimmick is something functionally equivalent to a map-wide persistent sunblocker effect, and in the place of normal ecology, there's a bunch of fungal plant substitutions everywhere. It's a nice aesthetic, but we are here for the ancient stockpile, so I set my hackers to work, sit back, and wait. Clearing out said stockpile proves to be slow and annoying, but not terribly dangerous as long as you're willing to be a bit careful. I don't have enough stuff to make myself a shield belt, so I can't take hunter drone triggers and am forced to run away from them until their batteries die every time I trigger one, but other than that, there isn't anything worth worrying about here. On the flip side, other than some gravlight plates and a grav core, there also isn't much worth stealing either. I got a bit of medicine, a bit of steel, and some food out of the whole adventure, but that's basically it. It does kind of make me wonder if you could survive down here semi-permanently, though, because if you get enough components, it might be possible, but I do feel like eventually your steel supplies would run out, and without going to the surface to get more, you'd start running into issues. With that second grav core, for the next little bit at least, the name of the game is upgrades. Ship upgrades, pawn upgrades, gear upgrades, everything upgrades. The biggest contributor to this is the addition of a long-range mineral scanner and some additional solar power capacity to my ship, thanks to the contents of the said stockpile allowing me to do the expansion work needed for them. And the resulting trickle of plasteel deposit locations sees me bouncing around the map, mining deposits, doing some upgrades, and bailing anytime I see anything that wants to twiddle my fiddles and can't be dissuaded with high-velocity plasma fire. During this time, I also banish Gamuholic V1. I don't have a pawn to rename into Gamaholic 2.0 just yet, but Gamu just got dumped by Fishmission, giving her a massive -20 moodlet for the foreseeable future, and that, combined with her being too smart, means she is simply too much of a liability to keep around here anymore. She was an excellent miner and a decent cook, but both of those are roles that can be filled by other members of the colony now, and with the way this DLC works, I would much prefer having a small, stable colony rather than a large, high-functioning, and slightly psychotic one. While we do upgrades, it's time for Fun Facts with Goose. The fact of the day is, raiders can steal your engines. Yeah. This charming individual was an ambusher for a gold vein I was trying to mine, and rather than fight my pawns like you would normally expect, he just walked up to my ship, picked off an engine, and bailed before I could rotate my pawns around and stop him? I'm honestly 50-50 on whether this is an intended game design thing or not. My read on engines is that since you can't path through them, they ought to be treated as solid tiles like a nutrient paste dispenser is, but they are minifiable, and raiders could steal things like unpowered turrets in their looting phase, so maybe it makes sense. I don't know. I guess we need to wall our ship engines in then. Okay, fine. One of the other interesting paths for improvement offered by Odyssey is by introducing a new mechanic whereby certain quests can give you custom, augmented versions of base game weapons. If you're familiar with how Persona weaponry works in Royalty, the mechanic is quite similar, but with Odyssey the weapons are only obtainable as quest rewards, can be used by anyone, and so far as I'm aware are only eligible to spawn on projectile-firing weapons. So no legendary grenades, smoke launchers, or rockets for me. I did some testing with the weapon and augment pools earlier, and much like Royalty, the weapons seem to range from being mildly decent to utterly useless, depending on the base type of weapon you roll, but I figured I should at least show it off before ignoring it. To that end, it's mercenary hunting time. Woohoo! They're, not really all that elite, despite what the quest said. Unless you consider streaking with a handgun to be a viable combat strategy, that is. In fact, most of these people are pretty much just bog-standard pirates with decent equipment, but there's only 14 of them, it's foggy, which turns everyone into stormtroopers, and I have pretty close to the best gear in the game, so getting this weapon was not much of a fight. The weapon that I earned from this engagement was something called the LMG of Legend, which is both technically accurate and quite possibly the single most uncreative name for a legendary LMG that I could possibly come up with. In all normal respects, it's just a legendary LMG, which even after the buff they got in 1.6 only rates it around a good quality charge rifle in my opinion, so while it's a decent weapon, especially in close quarters, it is not worth making a trip out to a camp for. In addition to its legendary status, this weapon has 3 passive perks associated with it. The first is that it has an underbarrel EMP launcher that allows the colonists to fire 2 of the weaker variety of EMP shells used in a traditional EMP launcher, at the cost of 30 steel apiece. This is basically worthless, since I will have a dedicated EMP grenade thrower whenever I engage mechs, and will never need the effect otherwise, but it doesn't hurt anything, so whatever. The second perk is EMP ammunition, which, depending on what you're shooting, is either incredibly bad, actively useless, or at best, mildly beneficial. Contrary to what you might expect, the effect is a massive liability in mech engagements, because even if I micro the target selection for the weapon, bullets fired from it can very easily miss and hit other mechs, which will then make them immune to much more effective sources of EMPs like EMP grenades. On the other hand, it does mean that bullets fired from it will instantly pop shield belts, though, which I could see being kind of handy. The third effect just makes it a bit more accurate at close range, which is kind of a wash as well. There are very few situations where I will want to be engaging in a sustained battle at close range, but more accuracy is always more gooder. So, congratulations, Goose, you got yourself a weapon. Cool, back to what we were doing in the first place, which was upgrade hunting. The MLG LMG may not be the most fantastic weapon of all time, but what it does have is DPS, which makes it an excellent tool for shooting through the walls of an unstable nuclear reactor, which is a safe, sane, and consensual way of breaking into a facility to steal its grav core. I see no flaws with this plan. Speaking of which, welcome to the Scarlands, which is yet another biome introduced by Odyssey. It's basically just a Hollywood-branded interpretation of a Chernobyl biome, so big craters, toxic water, toxic fallout, angry mechs, sick and starving animals, you get the idea. Of course, in reality, Chernobyl is actually doing quite well right now, entirely because humans can't live there anymore, and the resulting lack of stinky monkeys tearing the place up has so vastly improved its ecology that it has more than offset the damage caused by unnaturally high levels of background radiation. Goose fact number 2, folks, the presence of large amounts of humans is more disruptive to the environment than actual nuclear fallout. Anyway, you know the drill with these sorts of ancient ruin set pieces. Breach and clear, shield belt users go first to eat up the hunter drones and turret fire, shoot anything that moves until it stops moving, and then keep shooting it until it can't shoot back. Once we find the reactor, we go in, hack it, yoink the core, and now all of a sudden one of your parents has a surprise brother. Congratulations, it's a boy. They named it Bob. With 3 grav core upgrades to my name and enough grav panels to make the hull itself a non-issue, I can really get a proper ship rolling now. So I do that. My new totally not a flying saucer design now features only the best of amenities, such as a proper, sectioned off-ish storage room for all those people who hate looking at mountains of raw, unfiltered material wealth, and also the several tons of stone brick that I have been shipping all over the world because I haven't found a use for them yet. We also have an engine block that somehow still functions, despite all of the engines pointing directly at each other, that comes complete with walls, so people can't come along and steal them. We even have a cold room and a kitchen for people who like eating meals that aren't made with ingredients that are lukewarm, vaguely moldy, slept on, or taste faintly of feet. And that kitchen comes with its own dedicated storage area, so never again will we have to relive the great potato abandonment of, whenever that was. Most importantly for my sanity, however, we have a shuttlecraft. It's basically just a reusable cargo pod with a bit of a cooldown between its launches, but it sports 500 kilos of capacity and a generous fuel tank, which lets me do things like take little vacations to friendly faction bases to unload all of my junk without having to park right outside of them or allow 4 to 6 weeks for caravan delivery. Essentially, it unlocks inventory management, and it's glorious. It does, however, struggle with precision landings, so perhaps I will avoid using it in space just in case. Don't worry, that roof was entirely decorative. Of course, we still have a ways to go, and quite a few more bits to track down and install, but for now, I think this will have to do it for this episode. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.